Alrighty, guys, let's talk about the latest entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's talk about Agatha All Along. So if you've been following the channel for a little bit now, you'll know that I haven't been particularly excited about Agatha All Along. Nothing in the marketing has made me all that thrilled, to be quite frank. And, nothing about the concept of the show, nothing about even the announcement or what it was going to be about, the Witch's Road, everything like that. Just nothing got me super thrilled and jazzed to be watching the show, I'm not going to lie. Now, if you've also been watching the channel for a long time, you'll know that I am the kind of person who says, that's all of our expectations, it's totally fine. We can all say, look, this poster looks bad, the trailer doesn't look good, whatever. I don't think this actor seems to fit the role just based on, whatever promotional material has come out. But then I'm always the kind of person who leaves my expectations at the door because I've been pleasantly surprised so many times. For example, recently, Inside Out 2, I said, there's just no way it can top the original being perhaps my favorite movie of all time. And it didn't top the original, but it came close. It's a fantastic movie, and I would have robbed myself if I went into the movie saying it's gonna suck and it's gonna be terrible. And I enjoyed the movie, but then I came out of it being like, well, I can't say I liked it. So anyways, all that to say, I wasn't super excited about Agatha All Along, but I went into these first two episodes, as we're going to talk about here in full spoilery detail, with some interest and really with an open mind to say, okay, let's see what you got. So this is going to be a full spoiler discussion about episodes 1 and 2 of Agatha All Along. The episodes premiered on Wednesday, September 18th, and they will be coming out, I believe, weekly until pretty much Halloween time. And so that's pretty exciting. So if you have not seen episodes 1 and 2 of Agatha All Along, just save the video, come back to it later, because this will be a full spoiler discussion. You have been warned. So we'll be talking about the episodes in detail. I wrote some notes down, as I always do, and then we will be just going through the episode, doing a play-by-play and talking about the different details that I noticed and what I was thinking along the way. And then, of course, at the end of each episode, as I talk about each episode one at a time, I'll be doing some quick thoughts, and then we'll do some overall thoughts at the very end of this segment. So without further ado, let's get into Agatha All Along. So seeing the trailers, right, we had known that at least part of the beginning of the show, and this was just apparent from the trailer, was going to be about Agatha breaking out of Wanda's spell. Really, a lot of questions, because, what we had heard from a lot of critic reactions, which, just to sidebar for a quick second, a lot of the critic reactions to the show actually were quite positive, which was really interesting because they didn't, they didn't lift the embargo until quite late, the review embargo until quite late before the show came out, so it was really interesting, but critics are generally pretty positive. Now, I want to caution by saying, unlike a situation like Rings of Power, where it seemed like the critics got all 8 episodes and most of them generally enjoyed the entire season, the critics here only got 4 episodes. And it's tricky, right? Because Disney Plus has been really good at making good episodes 1 to kind of the beginnings of seasons, right? I can't really think of a Disney Plus MCU show, Star Wars show, that hasn't delivered at least the first couple episodes. And I'm even talking about Secret Invasion. I thought had a lot of promise, even though I don't hate the show as much as everyone else does. I don't particularly love it either. Secret Invasion, though, Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, I thought the first couple episodes of all of those shows were quite solid. So, take that with a grain of salt. I believe there's 9 episodes in Agatha All Along, and just because the critics saw 4 episodes and most of them say they liked it, I'm not going to take that to the bank. That being said, I took this as a good sign because obviously you don't want the alternative where they come out of the first 4 episodes and they say, yeah, it's not really good. So there is that to consider. But yeah, so the critics seem to really like it, at least the beginning parts of the show. And one of the things they talked about is that the first couple episodes are going to be a little bit slower, and some critics were not as happy about that as others, but most critics said then it picked up in episodes 3 and 4 on the Witch's Road. So, let's talk about episode 1 because it starts out, right? We've seen it in the trailers. Agatha is still under Wanda's spell. And I think that, there are all these stories coming out about Vision Quest, right? Or the Vision Show. And Vision, the show Vision being the third part of a trilogy of WandaVision, Agatha All Along, and Vision Quest, or whatever the Vision Show is going to be called. And I thought, that's kind of cute, right? I mean, it doesn't really feel like that's the case. It just kind of feels like that's your way of trying to tie everything together when, especially the Disney Plus shows, have not been as interconnected as the movies. And even the movies aren't as interconnected anymore. But, in fairness, right, I immediately, as I was watching the show, I went, no, this is picking up, literally, it is a spiritual successor, but it's almost a literal successor to WandaVision, because while Wanda has gone off since the end of WandaVision and 3 years have passed, right, it's 2021 to 2024, 3 years have passed since WandaVision, and Wanda has since died as far as we know. Again, she might come back in the show, she might come back later in the MCU, but one has died. And Agatha has been under the spell for 3 years, but it still feels like a very direct continuation now. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we are still in Westview, right? So there is that. And we do see a lot, if not pretty much every single other supporting character that was in WandaVision. We get to see pretty much all of them. Herb, Norm, Mrs. Hart, who is now Sharon Davis, I guess, who is on the Witch's Road, which we'll talk about her more in episode 2. Deborah Jo Rupp, just, giving another great performance as well. I will always remember her from Friends, but as being Alice, but, just a really wonderful presence to have back in the show. But we get to see all of these, Dottie, we get to see all of these WandaVision characters back. And I was surprised to see how it actually affected me, not emotionally necessarily, but just to say, oh yeah, this feels like the same world, right? It feels like, oh, we're returning back to Westview, and a place that I had such fondness for because, for those of you who don't know, WandaVision is something I hold it near and dear to my heart. Obviously, for the time it came out, we had nothing else to watch, and it was just a perfect storm, if you will, of just when it came out, but also just because I love the show. I've seen it again since, and we've talked about it on the channel. Just love the show. So anyways, even before that though, I wanted to point out, even before we get to the whole Detective Agnes thing, we start out with Marvel Television. And I don't think it's the first time, well, no, it is the first time that we've seen the Marvel Television banner. So I just wanted to talk about it a little bit briefly because earlier this year we saw Marvel Spotlight with Echo, which is interesting. And then now we've seen Marvel Television. We saw Marvel Studios with Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't know how I feel about this, guys. Honestly, I think I would have just preferred put Marvel Studios. You got to own everything that you make, right? Because here's the thing. I understand that, you made something like The Marvels, which I think was fine. And you had Miss Marvel and, from the show Miss Marvel, which I thought was really good overall. Not every single episode, but overall pretty good. But it backfired because you brought over television characters into the big screen and nobody really cared to see that, right? So I get it. They're probably very hesitant now to even cross over TV characters into movies, and they just kind of want to make it segmented. Like you have, Agatha All Along, you have Ironheart, who was in the movies, to be fair, to start, and then, going into Disney Plus now, but then even characters like Nova and Wonder Man who have shows coming out, and Vision seems like he's just kind of being sequestered over here. So, and She-Hulk, as well. So it's interesting that they're dividing it into Marvel Television and Marvel Spotlight. Marvel Spotlight, I don't even know what that is. Is that just like, hey, not important to the MCU, but here's a show that we greenlit and we're gonna make. I don't love that, honestly. It's something I wanted to point out, not something I want to talk about too much longer, but just something I noticed with the Marvel Television branding at the beginning. But anyways, so we get to the beginning of the show and we see Agatha. She is still Agnes, and it's a very similar vibe to WandaVision because she is now trapped in a reality and she doesn't quite know what's going on. She's almost replacing the Vision role in WandaVision, where you have this character who doesn't really know what's going on, but that something is off, albeit it really just spans one episode. And I'm kind of glad that they did that because while I loved WandaVision and while I love the concept of, the reality bending and not knowing where you are, not knowing who you are, I think that if you did this for too long, it would have felt very derivative of WandaVision. And I don't think that that's what we really wanted. So thankfully, by the end of episode 2, it feels like a very different show. And we'll see where that goes, for better or for worse. But a lot of allusions, to her being under the spell, a lot of little puns here and there. I think they mentioned things like hibernation. And obviously you see, characters that we're familiar with from WandaVision, like Herb. So it's really interesting just to kind of see, I think they had a lot of fun writing these scenes out because it felt, they got to kind of dip back into the well of WandaVision and kind of work with this reality bending sort of plot here. So then we see, presumably, some manifestation of Wanda's dead body. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to be, because I think, again, a lot of this is supposed to be in Agatha's mind, right? Because I think, what we realize as she breaks out of the spell is that she's been living, so it's not like she's been kind of quarantined or isolated on her own. She's been living in the neighborhood, but her neighbors just kind of treat her as crazy Agnes or, crazy whatever. But I think that it's interesting that she sees this dead body, and I wonder this probably isn't the literal dead body of Wanda Maximoff, but it is a fairly accurate representation, the burnt fingers and everything like that. So I wonder if this is sort of Agatha's mind reckoning with the fact that the person who put her under this spell is dead now, and then you just kind of have this physical representation of it in her mind. Not even sure. I'm not entirely sure about that, but just a theory and a thought that I had. Elizabeth Olsen, they don't show her face. I probably, for the reasons that I listed above, just because we don't know who it is, the mystery, but also because if you showed Elizabeth Olsen's face, you probably had to pay her, even if it was just a mannequin or whatever. So there is that. But yeah, I mean, this show at the beginning feels very much like a TV show because it is going for that same vibe of WandaVision. It's kind of spoofing the detective show. I like the intro a lot. I like that it's called Agnes of Westview, just like how WandaVision played off of all the sitcom tropes and things like that. I really did enjoy all of that as well. So yeah, a lot of my questions in these notes here as we're going through episode 1 was really about the people, right? I was thinking, okay, if Wanda lifted the hex, then how do all these people, Norm, Dottie, Herb, all these people in the hex, how did they still remain in the hex? And I think we kind of learn, and I think my best guess for this theory is that, well, I think it's just Agatha kind of trying to represent it in her own mind, because she's the only one in the hex, but everyone else has moved on and they still live in Westview. But that was my question throughout the majority of the first episode. The other thing I noticed actually in this first episode is that the music was quite good. There are some pretty creepy piano tones and some pretty ominous sounds, and I think the music fit the ambiance really well. It's not something I notice a lot with these television shows or with movies that are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, quite frankly, because other than maybe an Alan Silvestri who does the Avengers scores, not a lot of the music, maybe Michael Giacchino as well, not a lot of the music is super memorable, but it just I think that it stood out in a really interesting way. Then we get the introduction of Aubrey Plaza, who is playing, I believe her name is Rio Vidal, and she kind of infiltrates into this vision, and she's good. I'm very used to her. What I know her from is Parks and Rec. Ironically, Catherine Hahn also Parks and Rec, so there's a little bit of a crossover there as April Ludgate. And if for those of you who've seen Parks and Rec, she's a very dour, cynical, sarcastic kind of character. And here, I think she's playing, I don't know, sinister, even seductive in a certain sense. I think it's really interesting that she gets to play a very different side. And I think that she does a really good job, especially, she's infiltrating these, I don't know, not dream sequences, but, really reality bending, mind warping sequences where she's in Agatha's head and she's kind of hinting to the fact that, okay, you're in a fake reality, but we'll just kind of play along. And I think that is really, really interesting as well. And then we get the reality starting to crumble around her as Joe Locke is introduced. So Joe Locke, steals something. We're going to call him Teen because I know the temptation is going to be to call him Billy, or Wiccan or whatever. And I'm pretty sure, I think I'm about 90% sure that he is playing Billy or Wiccan or whatever, Wanda's son in some interesting way. I'm sure that they'll have a reason for it because they're building it up as the central mystery to the show, which I think is interesting. So they better have a good payoff for it. I'm going to call him Teen because against my, better judgment, I think that I really think that he is Billy or Wiccan because we've kind of suspected this for a long time, even before the show came up. But I think there's something nagging in the back of my head, the 15% that goes, they might be pulling something interesting here. They might be trying to do something subversive. And I just want to kind of temper my own expectations. So we're just going to let the mystery play out. But anyways, Teen, Joe Locke, I might even just call him Joe Locke for the majority of the season as we break these episodes down. But Joe Locke breaks into Agatha's house and then he gets captured, and then we see this interrogation scene, and I really do enjoy the scene where the reality is kind of bending around her and she sees the painting and the pictures turn into pictures of flowers, and I think that is a really great representation of how the spell is crumbling and how her mind is crumbling. I do like Joe Locke as well. We'll talk more about him in episode 2, but I think he's got the right mix of angst in this episode and spunkiness and what I don't even know what the right words are to describe it, but I think he's a really good counterbalance to Agatha, at least in her own reality, because I think their dynamics change quite a bit in episode 2, which we will talk about as well. And then we get the scene with Rio as she confronts Agatha in the room where Wanda's body is, and I actually really like, because in the trailers it kind of seemed like it was pretty corny and goofy, and there are some bits of this episode and these 2 episodes that are corny and goofy, but for the most part it actually works quite well, because I thought that the scenes where she was going through the old outfits from WandaVision in the trailers, I thought that's a bit goofy. She's kind of hamming it up, because the last outfit we see in the trailer and the last outfit she wears is the one from the 60s, the first episode of WandaVision. But I actually love how almost horrific it is that she's clawing her way out of Wanda's hex or Wanda's spell, which I think is a really interesting I don't know, just a really interesting twist to all that. I think that the show isn't scary necessarily, but it has a good tone, and it's setting a good tone. And I'm curious to see how they're going to, mess with that and how they're going to pull it off as the show progresses. So yeah, the waking up part I actually thought was really interesting. Would also love to see some more about Rio and Agatha as they start fighting, and then just would love to get more of their backstory, which I'm sure we will. And then Rio mentions the Salem 7, which we see them in episode 2. They just kind of seem like a bunch of zombie characters, which I don't know. No pun intended. Every time I say witch, by the way, I'm just saying witch. But yeah, I don't really know. I mean, it's the second that Rio said the Salem 7, I kind of went, uh-oh, generic villain alert. Maybe they're just cannon fodder, and Rio Vidal or Mephisto or Scarlet Witch reincarnated is the real villain of the show. I don't know. But yeah, I thought that Aubrey Plaza got to give an even more unhinged performance in the scene where she's in the actual reality, which I think was really cool. And the episode ends, and that kind of shocked me because I actually was having a really good time with this first episode of Agatha. What also tripped me up because I thought, there's a lot of time left or whatever. Disney Plus did that crazy, stupid, annoying thing where they said the episode's 42 minutes long and it's literally 35 minutes. It's 35 minutes because 7 minutes are credits, and that's crazy. That's almost, I would have just preferred it to have said 35 minutes at the beginning and then just left the rest to credits. So anyways, yeah, I think I took it as a good sign that episode 1 ended, and then I went, actually, no, I kind of wanted to see more. Luckily, I do get to see more because episode 2 is called Circle, Sewn with Fate, Unlock the Hidden Gate, which is a reference to the lyric in that song that they sing, which we will discuss at the end of this segment. So, I like how Agatha, after she wakes up from her spell, or Wanda's spell, is just kind of manic. I think that that's a really good energy here. And then we get some exposition. So this episode, I think, is probably less strong than the first episode because I think the first episode had a lot of the strengths from WandaVision. This episode was a little more exposition heavy, a little bit more just trying to, Agatha being a recruiter and then just kind of going through the motions in that regard. There were a couple interesting things at the end, especially, but as we go through through this episode, I think there's a little bit less to really dissect here. But, one thing that's interesting that teen Joe Locke's character says is that what's at the end of the Witch's Road is whatever you want, basically. And that kind of gave me flashbacks to Eternity and Thor Love and Thunder, which was not a great thing in that film. I honestly thought that just the whole idea of, you get whatever you want if you do this quest or whatever. It's just not super appealing to me. One of the worries I have about this show is, okay, we have 7 episodes left. You're telling me that you've laid out basically the roadmap of the show. It's just, we're just going to walk down this road until we get to the end, which I know is, the Wizard of Oz, right? Like, it's a classic story or whatever. The hero's journey just kind of represented by a road, even though Agatha is an anti-hero villain. I don't know. But I'm just a little bit nervous. How are you going to fill these 7 episodes if you're just going to walk down the Witch's Road and then maybe run into obstacles every now and then? So we'll see. We'll see about that. But yeah, one of the most interesting things, they're setting it up to be the big mystery of the series so far, is who Joe Locke is playing, who Teen is. I think it's actually really well executed. The fact that every time he tries to reveal things about himself, he can't, whenever he says his name, his name doesn't come out. And I think that that's actually really fascinating. I think Joe Locke in this episode he gets to be, who the character actually is, not the version of the character that was in Agatha's mind. And he's charming. Although I will say, I think that it's on the borderline for me because he is asked to be basically a super fan of witches. And he's not really given a ton of other things to really be in this episode. I'm sure he will get a lot more dimensionality, a lot more character as the series progresses. But in this episode, he really is just told to be a fanboy of witches. And I don't think that plays as well as they thought it might. I think he's just kind of coming off as, he's very charming. Obviously, he's very charismatic and he's very fun. He brings a very fun energy that really matches Catherine Hahn's kind of manicness, if you will, especially when they're recruiting the other witches. It's cute, it's fun, it's really interesting to see, but just as a character, it's it's a little, I don't know, it's just not quite clicking for me on that 3-dimensional level. Right now it's just fun to watch, is what I will say. I also did get the feels when Agatha walked by the Wanda house lot. I thought, that's one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the MCU, and you had to walk by it, and then she spits in it because, of course, it's Agatha Harkness. I think that's part of the fun of the character is that she has no respect. She has no no regard for anything. She just wants what she wants. And we'll see if her heart kind of, melts a little bit. Anyways, the other big gripe I had with this episode is that I feel like it was a little too quick of Agatha being convinced by Teen to go on the witch's road, because I think the second that Joe Locke convinces Agatha, hey, we need to go on the witch's road, she has a little bit of hesitation, but then all of a sudden she's like, oh, I don't know your name, let's go. And I was like, it felt a little quick. Now, it's mitigated a little bit by the end of the episode because, I think that there are some more interesting ulterior motives that she had there. But I still think it was just a little quick for her to kind of trust this Joe Locke character when she had no idea who he was, even a day ago. So I think that's interesting. They're driving along. They're going to recruit other witches. And then he gets a call from Boyd, who I'm assuming is his boyfriend. And let's begin the whole aerospace engineer theorizing again. Who's Boyd? Is Boyd, who does Wiccan end up with in the comics? I forget. It's another Young Avenger, right? But maybe it's that character. I don't think so, but who knows? Who even knows? You'll have to let me know in the comments down below if you have any. I can't believe this is where we are with shows like WandaVision and Agatha. But who is his name even Boyd? I think it's Boyd, right? I could be wrong. It went by pretty quickly, but you'll have to let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, Agatha goes to meet the first witch, and basically the rest of my notes here until the very end were me just trying to write down all the characteristics of the different witches, because these are going to be the main characters of the show. So we have Lilia, I believe, she's the diviner. By the way, Agatha doing her best Benoit Blanc impression, which I think was really fun. She's just, she's great. Catherine Hahn is just so committed to every role that she's in, and she's just great. But yeah, she's the diviner. Agatha's being a recruiter. The word she says the word coven up at one point, which I think is kind of an interesting term to describe the process of needing the coven to get to the witch's road. I thought that was a little over the top, but whatever. I did laugh actually out loud a couple times. I wrote them down. In this episode in particular, I think that the line where Agatha is like, "This is my pet. Say hi, pet." That just got me for some reason. It was really funny to me. But I still, as I was watching it, I was still going, okay, so I'm not entirely sure why she's trusting him that much to kind of just tag along, even though all he's proven is that he's a super fan and there's something interesting extra about him. But whatever, we'll see. So we have Lilia, who is the divination witch, and then we have Jennifer Kale, I believe. She is the potions witch. Okay. And then we have Alice, who is the protection witch, I believe. And then, finally, I think it's implied that Rio Vidal is the green witch. But then I actually thought this was really funny, and I stand by this. I think it's really funny that they're taking Deborah Joe Rupp along. What's her name? Sharon Davis. I think that's really funny. If they keep her around through the rest of the show, which I hope they do, I think it's actually super funny to have a non-powered character there just to kind of balance out the comedy. Because if we're gonna go in the direction of horror comedy, I think that's actually a really funny thing to do for the show. So I'm a big fan of that. And obviously, Deborah Jo Rupp, she's great. She's really great. So there's that. Also, later on in the episode, Joe Locke makes a reference to the fact that his mom is dead. So again, if he's Billy, then we'll see. I mean, Billy, the Scarlet Witch in the 616 universe didn't have kids. So, if it's an 838 Billy or whatever, I mean, his mom is still alive, I think. So yeah, that's it's just something to keep an eye on. I mean, pretty much everything that Joe Locke says that has anything to, in reference to something else that we don't know about is going to be something that I'm sure a lot of us will be keeping track of as well. But it's also really interesting that it's not only when he says his name, but then when he starts talking about where he comes from, that all of that sound kind of gets blocked out and Agatha can't really see that. Although I will say, speaking of Agatha and this teen character, I think Agatha's a little bit too mean to him. I know that Agatha is not necessarily a good person, but we're meant to see her as the protagonist of this series for better and for worse, I think, just because she's a kind of a villainous character, especially in WandaVision. But she is a bit cruel to this guy. I mean, I don't know. On the one hand, she trusts him a lot and she's buddy-buddy with him. And then on the other hand, she's tearing down his welcome to the coven, signs. And I think that that's a little bit mean, but whatever. So then we get to the end of the episode and then they're singing the song. And the witches outside are multiplying, and I thought that effect was actually super creepy. I thought that worked really well. The fact that you have Herb, I think, and then and then the teen character standing outside, and then all of a sudden the witches are multiplying and running around. I think that was actually pretty creepy. I don't think it was that scary, particularly when they were in the house, especially when the one kind of fell down the stairs as they were entering the Witch's Road. But I think that for what it is, I think that it's not like it took me out of the episode necessarily. Now, talking about the song, as I promised we would, I think that the song started out pretty corny. I'm not going to lie. I don't necessarily love that they had to sing a song to enter the Witch's Road or, whatever they were doing. That being said, I think that as the Salem 7 were attacking the house, I think the song actually got creepier and creepier. And especially as the other harmonies entered in. By the way, love the shots of Sharon Davis, Mrs. Davis, just singing along and having a great time, not knowing what's going on. I think that's really funny. That's awesome. But yeah, I think as the song went along and as the attack went along, I think that it worked a lot better. And so I was a lot happier with it in general. So I think that was something that was definitely good there. But it was a little bit corny. I definitely think that the fact that, again, we sing a song and then we open a door and it's like, okay, sure, that's interesting. The other interesting thing, though, is that there's an allusion to the fact that Agatha was never really planning on having a coven, and maybe even never planning on going down the Witch's Road at all. And she just wanted the witches there, and then she wanted their power. And then the fact that the Witch's Road opened was probably an unintended consequence of that. And I think that is actually really clever, because it's showing how Agatha is still breaking out of that villain persona. And I think we'll see throughout the rest of the series how that manifests and how that plays out. But they are on the Witch's Road. They take off their shoes. I know that there are a lot of behind the scenes, I guess, videos and reels of them walking on the Witch's Road. So I think a lot of it is a practical set, but it looks really good. It's not one of those practical sets that looks really cheap. And if they can do it this way, I think obviously it's always better to do practical, most of the time I should say, practical sets than green screens and CGI sets. And yeah, there they go, down the Witch's Road. So we'll see in episode 3 what happens. Again, my one big concern is that they have now just set up, okay, we're going on the Witch's Road for 7 episodes, and then there will be some obstacles and they'll get sidetracked, and eventually they'll end up at the end, and then we'll see what happens there. So I'm just curious to see how they're going to fill the rest of the series. But these first 2 episodes, look, I said before, I wasn't particularly looking forward to this show. That being said, I think that a lot of what they were setting up here was really good, because I think it was just really solid in how they were portraying Agatha, how the tone was set up, and what the characters were doing. And I had a really good time with these first 2 episodes. So you'll have to let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of these first 2 episodes of Agatha All Along? Are you looking forward to the 3rd episode? We did a little bit of a bigger breakdown here. These segments, probably won't be as long in future Access Blockbusters Pod episodes, but also there aren't a lot of topics to talk about in the episode anyways. At least by the time I'm recording this, I might have to add things as things come out. But yeah, so I just thought let's do a deep dive on the first 2 episodes of Agatha All Along, and of course we'll be talking about other things as well. So again, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of Agatha All Along episodes 1 and 2.